I am a self-proclaimed lazy crafter. I love pattern paper because a lot of the work is done for me. But recently I found a way that I can get a little bit messy, but not have to put in as much effort as some other techniques, and I want to share with you today because I think a lot of you would have fun with it too. Hi, I'm Jess from jesscrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get inky.
So this is something I didn't ever think I would buy. I've seen it a few times. It's one of those things where somebody on Instagram convinced me, so we all know how that goes. But this is a Gelli Plate, and it's not something I would typically use, but I really like the possibilities for making your own patterns much more quickly compared to a lot of other techniques I've been exposed to over the years. So I do have a Tim Holtz glass mat, which I'd also resisted buying, but it seems to work really well with the Gelli Plate because I've been playing with it a little bit, without filming. And it's gonna put more glare. You're gonna see my lights and that kind of thing, my hands moving. But hopefully this will be kind of a fun demonstration regardless, and I'll kind of work on maybe what I do in the future. I have my Gelli Plate on here. It's like a fairly large size one. I was able to actually pick it up at a local big box craft store though, just because it's one of those things that's kind of like heavy and expensive to ship. So I like the idea of ink blending on my cards or creating my own backgrounds. And there's many techniques out there to do that. However, I usually found them like really time consuming. Even just ink blending a background can take a lot of time. And I was introduced to the idea of the Gelli Plate as a way to not spend nearly as much time with that ink blending and then having to layer something on top of it too. Because that's the thing, once you even do the ink blending background, then there's usually like, okay, now you have to like, maybe you're adding embossing beforehand and then you're ink blending, or then you're stamping on top of it or something like that. And it just all kind of adds up for me. So usually you put your ink on the Gelli Plate and then you take a brayer and you, that's supposed to help it blend together. I was not getting as soft lines with distress ink as I wanted. So what I did is I smushed my distressed ink pads directly onto my Gelli Plate. And I'll do it again just to make sure it stays wet because I am gonna kind of walk through this presentation a little bit more. I always feel a little bit uncomfortable explaining techniques like this too, because I never feel like I'm an expert, but it's really just me showing you what I liked and what worked. And so I'm actually going to get rid of some of the harsh lines with my ink blending tool. And so this is the one that I use for blue Distress Oxide inks. I don't really have a lot of them. And this is still, like, you're gonna see those lines if I were to just print that. So I wanna be clear with that. Like, it's not like this is now perfectly smooth, but you may wanna now bring in the brayer and you'll find that you get a little bit smoother of a transition between the colors. You will want to pay attention to things though, like if you come through your dark ink and then go through your light ink, you're going to spread it around. And you want to be like kind of very lightly touching it and picking it up at the edges because you don't want to pull up too much of the color. And then you can take this brayer and rub it off on a piece of paper. That's going to all be sort of out of the screen there, but it actually creates a really nice ink blended background itself, or it can. So that's really cool too, because all of this process that I'm using is going to result in more than one result, and this is obviously also going to go much faster if I'm not stopping and explaining it all. Okay, so hopefully still wet ink. We'll see how well this is working. Then I said, there's always that extra step of adding the background. For here, I just need to press my stamp. This is an old Impression Obsession background stamp, and I'm pressing it into the paper. And this is so much easier than, and you can do the same thing with stencils too. You can press them into a Gelli Plate. This is so much easier than trying to like emboss a background. I'm terrible at embossing, not my thing. And even stamping a background, I think it takes a lot to get it to look good, but this has this sort of more freedom of the messy look. So this has lifted up some of the ink and left the snowflakes behind. You can't see that, but you will in a moment when I place my card down. So I'm gonna place just that's directly a card base down on, and then come in again with that brayer, and I'm pushing it down. This is just because I like to get a good impression. You can also do all this with paint. I just wanted to show you how it worked. Pull it up. And I feel like I'm getting a very similar look to ink blending and that really nice pattern, but without some of that extra work that it takes. And this is much faster. And now I can go print a whole bunch of these, and it's only going to get faster and faster as, you know, everything's prepared, so I can make multiples. Whereas if I was ink blending, yes, everything's prepared, I got all the supplies out, but ink blending in of itself takes a long time. I don't know if there's some techniques out there that people know that kind of speed up the process a little bit, but for me, each time I have to fill an entire sheet of ink blending, I'm like, all right, well, that's gonna take 10 minutes in and of itself. Like, I certainly can't blend that fast onto paper. It wouldn't work, and you wouldn't be able to smush it on and then blend it. And so now this first impression took off the ink and created mostly white snowflakes. If I want to keep doing that, I would have to clean this. However, I'm gonna just do a different impression. And this now has ink on it. And so instead, it's gonna look a little bit different. It's gonna leave inked snowflakes behind. So put some pressure on that and lift, put my card down. Probably should have been a little bit more precise about where I placed that, but that's okay. Make sure, because you do want to make sure you're like putting the card only in the area where the snowflakes were. But if it was like a little mistake, I could always trim it down instead of using it as a card base. Okay, and I'll show you how this looks a little different. So there's my second one. The first time through with the more white snowflakes, the second time through where it's left more color behind. And I could, again, just keep doing this pretty quickly, and I'm gonna make a lot of backgrounds really fast. Since today's about being a lazy crafter, I have this house mouse stamp from Spellbinders. These stamps are gorgeous. I love that Spellbinders is bringing them back because they've, like, the designs, the rights designs have changed hands over time, as far as I understand, and they're just always so pretty. So I'm gonna use this, but I'm gonna use it in a lazy crafter way. They're really fun to color. I've colored them in the past. I'll link you a video where I colored my last house mouse stamp set, and I'm not saying I'll never color this one, but when you're making Christmas cards or holiday cards, sometimes it's nice to have a fast way to do it. And so we could, you know, make a whole bunch of those backgrounds the way that I showed you. And then this step is also going to be relatively fast. The one thing, so, you know, I said I'm a lazy crafter. The less lazy thing would be to some ways to have the bigger ink pads, because when I have to go to stamp something like this, and then it takes a while because I have to like bring it all the way across the whole stamp rather than have like a bigger stamp pad would be much quicker to work with. But I also have limited space, and so I gotta work within my means here and tap away forever on a big image sometimes. Luckily, rubber stamps, which these are cling rubber stamps, do take ink really well. So usually I'll get a nice impression even when I do something like that. If I have clear stamps, especially like more thick, solid clear stamps, the teeny tiny ink pads can get a little frustrating from time to time. Okay, I definitely need a little more ink, especially here in the middle, and maybe I need to press a little harder. I want to make sure to mention that this stamp set was sent to me by Spellbinders to work with. So I received the stamp set in exchange for sharing my work. I stamped it again. I know these tools have become very popular over the last couple years. Mine's from Twiddler's Nook, but like they do hockey pucks and stuff too. I just really like supporting small businesses, and the crafter behind Twiddler's Nook is just a really sweetheart. So she makes some really cute trays and other, she's embellishments and things like that as well. Amanda Wilcock, I believe. So you could probably leave this card as is, but I tend to like a little bit of contrast at the borders. So what I'm going to do, and this isn't going to take much more time, I do have separate ink blending tools for non-distress oxiding. So basically all my dye ink and all my distress ink gets one set of tools, and then my Distress Oxides get another just because the formulations are a little bit different, so I prefer to have them separated. It also does seem to, I have a whole video about how I clean my blending brushes because I do find that especially the Distress Oxide inks, they do need to be cleaned at least every once in a while. And so what I'm going to do here is just blend on a little bit of that same ink that I just stamped with because it's the darkest ink that I've been working with today. And then it's just gonna kind of highlight that edge a little bit. I wish I hadn't got much of a blob there. This is definitely one of those instances where you start off the paper and come on, very common ink blending technique. Now this is a little bit time consuming, so not the most lazy crafter thing that I could do for sure, but it's a lot less precision involved because I don't have to cover like the whole thing. I don't have to, I don't know, like it's just a little bit at the edges. I don't mind it too much, but yeah, I will admit, like I probably am not gonna make like 50 of this, or if I was, I'd probably skip that step. So I've done this a few times and I have a few more I can stamp. It's again why a great lazy crafter thing to do, because then once I've set it up in my MISTI, I can stamp a whole bunch of them. Just like once I prepared and picked out all my supplies for the Gelli Plate, I can make a bunch of prints. However, they're not going to be as consistent as you might be able to achieve with, say, ink blending or some other results, where you can control the process a little bit more. I'm okay with that. That trade-off is solid for me. When I did the ink, when I came in with my brush, this is one of those examples. I found that I got an overall smoother look. Occasionally I would get like a very obvious brush stroke. I'm trying to see if I can show you that. When you do stamp something kind of busy over it, it's a lot less noticeable, but also here it just kind of looks like a swoosh of the wind, particularly because I am creating that snowy sky, so it works out really well. But here, for example, is one where I just put the ink down and then I brayered it. And it's got a much more sort of splotchy look. It's kind of like, because when you put the Distress Oxide inks on a non-porous surface like that, they kind of like bead up a little. It's not the best way to describe it, but ink does that. And so I feel like it's not that smooth, like ink blending look. So if I was trying to mimic that, that's why I want to bring that brush in. Also, sometimes when I did the brayer, I got more of a clear line between where one color stopped and another color ended, and that's from like the edge of the stamp pad. It didn't really blend it out. So hopefully this kind of gives you an insight of how to mimic that ink blended look with Gelli Plate and Distress Oxide inks. Paint is definitely a little bit different, blends very differently on it, but my channel is mostly for crafters who are more likely to have a bunch of inks already in their stash than necessarily a bunch of paint. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with the share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.